Everybody,
Good morning.
it's a wonderful pleasure to be here. It's been a long time, yeah. But anyhow, before we get into the big conversation here, I just wanted to remind everybody I speak from the heart. So as we share these thoughts, they are not just for you, but they apply to me just as much. So, you know, that little phrase, walk the talk and talk the walk, goes hand in hand there. So what has been going back and forth this morning was obviously reflection, you know, and today, considering the day that it is, All Hallows Eve, and so forth, the veil does appear to be that thin and transparent between the two worlds. So I was observing that in the morning. It just felt very naturally in that space is there. So my morning hour is usually on reflection and gratitude, but I want to start there because that is a very important part of the day, the beginning. And a lot of time, if you understand the health coaches, business coaches, anybody that is pushing you or amping you to get to your best, they always emphasize how you set tone to your day. The rest of the hours in the day go on exactly how you set the tone. So my morning ritual is to be reflective or pay attention, listen to something motivational. Sometimes phone conversations are inevitable, we cannot escape, so those type of things happen. But that morning hour is how the tone gets set. Now what I've been observing is, since this whole dynamic of the world is shifting and the collective consciousness is doing its own walk and talk, you have to be a little bit more extra mindful, because now you're dealing with a little bit more expanded, exponential, vibrational shift, and you have to pay attention, you know. It would be nice to put our heads into the sand and not worry about anything, right? But things doesn't work that way. We have to go out there in the world and deal with things. And as we take this journey, and I would say at this point, no matter spiritualism as a religion or no matter any religion, we're all finding the shift is affecting just about everything. And that's why it's called collective, because everything under the law of one gets connected. We're all connected in some way. Somebody somewhere is making an outcry or having a good moment. We all experience that part. So the interesting thought that also was occurring, which has been almost like a theme for my month of October, is to pay attention to all the natural and spiritual laws as I just go through in and out. Sometimes I choose to put myself in awkward situations so that I can get something out of it, you know, understand from that learning. And it is nice because I know what I'm getting myself into, the other person just gets into the fold of it. And my famous funny share of the story is I usually go to the car dealerships and just try to go through the ringing process of how to get to talk to the car salesman and work with them, because they're, you know, they're doing their job. They have to be persistent, and sometimes they can be more than that, but that comes with the enjoyment of learning, right? So as I was thinking about this, I was like, is there anything in our natural law series that is called the natural law of delusion, you know, diluting things, toning things down. So just giving a certain set of example. I'm sure everybody enjoys their beverages, unless you're drinking a very clear, strong glass of water, which you cannot dilute with anything. Water is water, but every other beverage that you would choose to enjoy can be diluted, right? How does it taste at some point? Have you ever had a weak tea? Or you ever had a glass of wine mixed with water or something? I don't have those taste buds for drinking processes, but I would imagine, you know, what it tastes, a very distasteful place is there. Just at the same time, you know, if you dilute a little bit more tomato sauce in your spaghetti concoction, it will taste off. So that is what I have been putting myself through all this month, is how do we uphold where we are? You know, we all create our belief patterns and systems by life as we experience life. But are we upholding the strong values, whatever that may be to you? Or it has to be a part of that collective where that value shifts us into perspective. And I know there's a little bit more drive here for my thought is to understanding where the world consciousness is shifting. Are we diluting what we are supposed to be? Are we compromising? Compromise is another word of diluting things. Because the moment you compromise with something, you've already lowered your power level at some point. So that collective consciousness is, what is this all about? There's one thing to be said for being safe and careful and mindful and respecting each other's boundaries. But also where this collective consciousness is shifting to say, are we compromising way too much, pushing us into that aspect? And that's the part of the enjoyment is, because as I kept going into this thought of what is my life about, or where do I stand in this world, within my belief system, within my own understanding, the religion, and just dissecting in life in small pieces. I was, taken back to our pioneers that started this movement, understanding, where they started. Things were very different, We were a very small blueprint. Today we are more globally accepted, but still as a religion we are not seen as spiritualists. And that's the part of that is we can be understood as a psychic and medium more easily than to say, hello, my name is Joy, I'm a spiritualist. Nobody would probably understand where I'm coming from. But if I tell them, oh, I can talk to the dead people, or I have psychic abilities, it's much more easier to grasp and grip on those objects. So once again, the part is how do I, or we as individuals should uphold what we believe in, right? If you go back in the times of our Fox sisters and our early modern day spiritualist pioneers, they've gone through their scrutiny, their skeptic communities, and being put on the radar for being watched, harassed, etc., etc., etc. And the thought would be, did they dilute it? And I would say, at this point, instead of giving you the clue or the answer, you will have to read the history. If you're interested in reading the history of spiritualism, you will understand was it diluted or not, and how that transition happened. That is an interesting part of our belief system, but that's something for you to discover. So be intrigued. Push yourself to read those chapters because you will find traces of that. Then another name that I've been really intrigued in this last year is Allan Kardec. And there is movies on Netflix about him, there are books, and he has been a part of, sort of a side part of spiritualist mainstream philosophy because he talked about channeling and seances and so forth. Just understanding his life story, did he dilute his belief in the afterlife? Did he dilute that in the understanding of what goes on beyond death? Did he slow down his curiosity to say, I'm going to accept whatever I have and then keep going? No, there's always a push behind a belief system. So the pioneers that have left us with all this legacy through their own difficult times, what are we doing with all that? I mean, that's where it goes, doesn't it? Can we dilute the law of gravity? We tried to defy the law of gravity. I've had participation in that, didn't work out so well. I still have a couple of sand particles in my elbow. I can feel them over 4 years later. So I've tried that, but it doesn't work. We cannot dilute the physical laws, the chemical laws. They have to stay in a certain bounds. Because if we dilute that, the result is totally not there. And that's what we have to understand. It doesn't matter what you believe in, but are you upholding the truest, strongest, purest value that you understand? As individuals, we do have perception that is different for each individual. Just like our DNA, I do believe our perception is different too. And that contributes to our belief system. That contributes to our own version of understanding. But at the same time, there is a community understanding, there's a global understanding, and how do we align there with ourselves? So thinking in this terms, we all had a family at some point. Some of us still do. So that little sense of friction that you would have experienced in the family, the difference of opinion, how did it allow you to compromise? I'm giving the alternative word with the aspect of delusion. How did you compromise in keeping track of life or managing life from that perspective? Did you cave in to what was being pushed on, or did they cave in what you were pushing on? Because there's always a two-way exchange. Life goes on in two directions. The only one direction is when you go from here to there. Sometimes there's a point of return through the near-death experiences, but sometimes you don't have a choice. You have to just carry on. And I'll just interject here, that has been interesting. Last 5-6 months, there have been experiences in my personal practice where the spirits have shared that once they transition from the physical to non-physical, they had no desire to come back. They had a choice. They were given a very clear choice to come back, but they didn't want it, so they kept moving on. And that's through learning, and that's what I'm talking about. When we take our understanding, our belief system, or our version of our own reality that we can continually create, do we test it? Do we take it out, or do we hold on to it so strong that we box ourselves in, disabling ourselves from growth? You know, it has to take place. It has to take some place. So that law of delusion clearly states that as you're learning and growing, there will be a change of understanding, but that is your responsibility, or our personal responsibility, as we read one of the principles, number 7, that talks about personal responsibility. And what I found beautiful in spiritualism as my own choice of religion at this point is it always is in my face. What am I doing with this? How am I going to respond to this? I have to go back into my gut feeling to say, ooh, should I hold on to what I believe in, or should I give in to whatever is flowing? Because I'm very fond of talking about path of least resistance, which means you don't get in the way of things, you just let things happen. Right? So it's sort of, natural laws can be very counterintuitive to each other, but they're always giving us a lesson. So the part is, if anybody's sitting across from me, what is my desire to influence them to change their understanding or pathway? None whatsoever, but there's a point of provoking that thought to question your own journey. And that's where that is. Sometimes it's very easy to just drop your guard and just go with whatever's going. It really is easy, because then there is no strive, there is no need to push on things, or there's no need to influence, convince people. You're already in the flow, you just carry on. Life's going to work out. But at the same time, you have to understand there is a trajectory. I'm going to give a wonderful example. I don't know who's speaking here, somebody from the electrical world. Have you ever seen a low electrical current? You know, this is normal, but have you ever observed a weak electrical current? Growing up in India, we had a lot of that. We had to really be mindful of how many appliances we can turn on at the same time, because we're going to blow out something to compensate for something. But anyhow, the low weak currents were there, and that's what we're talking about. There's always a risk of completely delineating yourself from what you started to believe in, right? There's one thing to understand your intelligence to a point where you say, you know, I align with this thought, and I don't align with this thought. I'll stay with it, or I'll move on. Because we always have that law of choice working for us. We always have a choice. But those that are still in the situation where life is, you need to go back and asking, what am I compromising here? What am I standing up for? If I have to make that choice to continue to move on, or to just hang on to whatever it is. Fear, fight or flight, whatever that may be, you have to understand, you know, the journey is there. Right? Now, how many of us here are healers in the room as we speak of? The good news for those that are not raising their hands is you're a healer too. See, that's how it works. Because what I'm about to talk about is something I learned a few years ago. I didn't think it from that perspective, but I learned in a beautiful way. So we're all healers. And some know the energy, some know how to manipulate the energy, and some are healers through speaking to each other or just being an ear. And some know to be a healer just by the mere presence, as you do your thing and I'm right here. There's somebody's there just as a pseudo behind the screen support system. And for us, mediums, we have a very pointed understanding that the spirit people, our dead loved ones, are absolutely there with us. They liked us or not when they were living, not the point. But they're there. So we have that battery of power that moves us in the direction of to create the healing, to create the mediumship, to create the experience. So this thought that I'm observing here was given, I was visiting in Canada in a retreat, and it was a beautiful setup of a week-long retreat, and I chose to be there for 2 weeks, so they had 3-week retreats. So I chose week 1 and week 2, where my original choice was week 2 and week 3 because it was medium and advanced, but they started me from beginner to medium. Didn't sit well with me for a while, but I was happy because I had to understand what they were talking about, and they introduced the subjects called to hold each other in our beauty, to hold each other in our space. And that is a big demanding responsibility as I see it from my perspective. Because you have to drop your judgment, you have to drop your own understanding, you have to drop your own inhibitions, your fears, everything to hold somebody in the space. They need that space. Can you offer them that space? And it is very challenging to start, but then I reflect like, oh, maybe that's why they wanted me to start, so that I can understand what the foundation is, what they are trying to incorporate in the growth and development as a medium. But that has stayed with me. So a lot of times in our practice, as we sit across from table, you have to learn to observe quietness, because the other person sitting across from the table, this may be their only opportunity to just let loose or whatever that is. Because we do step in the objectivity of privacy and withholding the information just for ourselves, and that's a sacred space that we create to hold that space for the person sitting across from us. So there's a lot goes on in a session. It's not just all easy peasy, happy, love and light. There's a lot that goes on that we take on as our responsibility. But we have to understand to disconnect with any prejudice, any judgment, any form of any critical thinking. Just be a listener, be an observer, hold that person in that space to what is needed, and it's not an easy task sometimes. It's demanding. And I speak this profoundly because we all have done that at some point. What makes it stellar is when we remove our judgment and our own predetermined observations. To hold somebody in that purest form, whatever their journey is, I think that's where the beauty of life comes into place. Now, I still take this back to the old pioneer system. When they started this journey, there were only very few people doing this work. There were only very few thinkers that were really consistently putting themselves through. You know, there were families that were intuitive, but they could not talk about because of wherever their community was, their growth or family was. But at the same time, there were only few people pushing onto that veil to get more information, like what's going on in the afterlife. Is there right? So the information was very concentrated through a certain channel, certain medium, certain trance channels, and that is how it was presented. So the thought was very concentrated. Now where we come into this part, and I'm very gently, slightly critically speaking here, we have to be an author of a book to be out there somewhere. There's a concept of an underlying aspect is there. So, you know, if you are a published author, you're well received because you've written something that is worth the while. So what we have learned is that we have layered with those little slight processes that have watered down our understanding. But if we go back into those old texts, it's still very strong and powerful, simple form, simple understanding. It doesn't come with sit like this, drink half a glass of water, go for a walk, come back under this tree, look at this leaf. You know, those things were not there. They were just, you sit in the power of spirit, spend time with the presence of the loved one that you're wanting to communicate. And that experience will happen. And that's why it's called growing your mediumship, to sit and grow. Sit and be still in one place to grow like a tree. It doesn't have to go in 10 different yards to become a big full-fledged tree. If we do that, it'd still be a little seed pod somewhere, not doing anything, dying over time and starting all over again. So the commitment of our work is usually to be still and let it grow. I will take this in different other religions. So if you've ever been exposed to Hinduism, there's a big emphasis on sitting in the front of your deity and doing your chanting and reciting and concentration and meditation, so forth. No different than going to a Catholic church or a seminary where there's direct communication is with their understanding of their God and their choice of text and incantation, repetition of their chants, etc. Being still in one place and growing from there, right? But we go into another religions, they're all similar in the construct of the foundation is similar. But then somebody has to go outside to do the work. And that's where I feel is a very critical flow in any given spaces. Those that are the message carriers, how are they presenting? You know, what is layering within that? And I'm speaking this very sincerely because I have to ask myself at the end of my conversation, is like, did I do it right? Did I have a sense of peace within it? Is there, but it's not about me, it's about the understanding is to question myself. Did I fulfill my personal responsibility as I took my oath many years ago to serve spiritualism in whatever capacity I'm asked for? And that's the part is, you have your own journeys, you have your own understanding, you have your own construct of life that might be dictating terms on you in some ways. But how are you standing up in your own belief system? Are you understanding this is what I understand, this is what I'm constructing of my understanding, and I'm going to uphold it, right? And as I bring my conversation to a sense of closing, my half-a-year thought, somewhere in June and July, I went through this big silent internal conflict space, which I will talk about because I think this law of delusion or diluting will make sense to you, because the question was, should I stay in one place or should I carry this journey everywhere? You know, and it's nothing new, nothing different, nothing novel. And a part of me was, where am I in all this? And that's where the big quandary was rising. Where am I in all this? And I had to sit still. And it was not an easy place because a part of me can be very playful, and you all can have that little playfulness in a different capacity because we're all individuals. But then the question was, am I serving the higher cause? Am I serving the purpose? Because I do feel that's where I am being drawn to, is there. So the pathway of understanding is, you know, you understand, you do your part, you carry on your philosophy in the best way possible. Now, I would say learning and studying natural laws over 18 years now, and it's an ongoing process. I don't think I can master them at any point, but I can always go in, dig in a little bit deeper, find somebody or somebody else to put myself through an awkward situation, including them, and say, what do we create from this? And that's the only way we can test our laws. You know, at the end of the day, we can see if we got the understanding or not. I can talk and read everything, but if it's not an application process, then it's sort of non-productive in my way, in some part. So to understand that, what you know, you know. And sometimes that knowing needs to become an application so that you can confirm what you know, you know, you know. And that's just a beautiful place to be. So, October 31st, today, All Hallows Eve, the veil is too thin to be able to send our love and respect to all those that have passed on. Our family members, our neighbors, our community people, those that we didn't even know, all the martyrs and the saints and all the elevated people and all the average people, everybody that's gone through, and just expanding our consciousness, our loved animals that have crossed over. So the veil is thin, to send them love, to receive love, to send them communication, to receive communication. That should be a focal point for any one of us is here, to just be in that trajectory of holding that communication. I know there are a few in this room that hold our loved ones very close to ourselves, our hearts, and we are constantly communicating with them. And that's a beautiful place to be. But those that can make time deliberately, when the veil is thin, like today, it's the best place to know it's time to get close to the other side of life, is there. So, if I were to ask, does everybody understand the term soul and reincarnation? Right? It's not such a fun part of spiritualist philosophy when we talk about reincarnation. It's not the most comfortable language to speak with. But I'm not going to go on in too much, but to understand that the soul is ever evolving. We believe in the continuity of life. There's no reformation in our understanding. So life is always continually learning. So the soul that goes beyond this veil, when we pass on, what happens then? Has anybody taken the journey of understanding the soul's journey? What happens next? What happens there? And yes, if you go on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, you'll find a lot of writing, but what about you? You have the same soul, same spirit like they had at one point. Since we are all connected, we share the same source in some ways. What are we doing to push onto that envelope of understanding is what is this soul will get to do on the other side. The one thing I profoundly tell to you, the first thing to drop when we die is our sense of judgment. Absolutely, immediately is gone. So, I'm trying my darn best to drop mine while I'm still living. Sometimes it has its challenges. Sometimes it's there. So on my end note, I would say to understand the beauty of life is amalgamation of everything, not just one thing. And sometimes that one thing that is identifier to who we are, who our personality is okay. But at the end of it all, it has to be an amalgamation of a lot of many things, not just one thing. And that's where